Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks for joining Mike and me for today's session. What we're going to be getting into is we talk about our DDoS protection as a service. A lot of our customers are very interested in that, but they want to know how to get ready. And so, what we've done now, this is the second of a two-part series. Both you can watch independently, but this we're going to focus a little more on the technical in terms of readiness. So, the title for today is pioneering DDpaas or DDoS protection as a service, ensuring your DDoS infrastructure is service ready. So, again, I'm sitting here with Mike Powell. So, Mike is one of our
Hi, everybody.
SCs. He's been with us for 8 years, both as a sales engineer and in the SOC, our Security Operations Center. So, I think it gives you a good opportunity to have seen both sides of it, right? So, you've seen
Yeah,
customers in
absolutely.
deployment and what they have to deal with, and the challenges and so on. And then also now being on the pre-sale side of things, understanding what's needed in the market. So
Mhm.
again, I've mentioned this before. Mike has an extensive bio, so I'm cherry picking all the points because I'd like to get to the conversation. So like I said, Mike's been with us for 8 years. He's on the GIAC advisory board. He's been there since 2016. He's got 15 years in the IT world, including at Mercer University and Robbins Air Force Base. I know I'm missing something, but I don't have my glasses on. so,
No, that's good.
so I think we'll just leave it there. But I
Yep.
mean, the point is, Mike has quite a bit of varied experience. So what he's talking about here is not, book knowledge. It's actually living this stuff. So, all right.
Yep.
So you know what? Let's get into it. So
Sounds
so we're
good.
gonna
Glad
get
to
in.
be here.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm glad
Yeah.
glad you're here, and at least this time, no snow.
Yeah.
Uh, so all right, let's just dig in. So I think if I can set the stage a little bit again, I mentioned a lot of our customers are ISPs, regional ISPs, so on, and then also too, a lot of hosting providers are interested in doing this. So it's one thing when they go out and you know set up their defenses for their own network, but then when they want to look at it and add a value add service, of course there needs to be some technical prep, and there's some things that they should know. um, so yeah, Mike, I guess the best place to start is if
Mhm.
I'm a provider, how do I go about evaluating my current situation? What are
Mhm.
some key considerations, some criteria I should include in that assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess one of the biggest things, obviously, determining, do you have DDoS protection right now? What type of DDoS protection do you have? Right. So, a good distinction that I think needs to be made for a lot of, say, it could be service providers, could be hosting providers, is protecting the network versus protecting the end customer. Right. So, what a lot of internet service providers will say you sign up for an ISP, right? And you say, "Hey, do you have DDoS protection?" Right? They might say, "Yes, we have DDoS protection." But what that is a protection that might sacrifice the person being attacked, right, in order to protect the network so that nobody else feels an effect from it. So they have
Hmm.
protection to prevent outages network wide, but they may not have protection to actually protect the customer or the IP that is being attacked by the DDoS itself. So that's just something to think about kind of when you're shopping DDoS. But this is where a lot of networks are kind of deciding, do I want to protect just my network, right? Or do I want to protect the end customer who's getting attacked? And of course, when we're talking about selling DDoS protection as a service, we're talking about protecting the end customer, right? So that if they get a DDoS attack, then that attack is going to be mitigated somewhere in the network before it reaches them, and so they just ideally won't even know that they got a DDoS attack, right? So
Oh no, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
no, yeah, I was going to
Yeah.
say, so that's just kind of an important kind of decision or distinction to make, and just to kind of talk about setting the stage for what we're talking about here is an actual protection to the end customer. um yeah, I mean, go ahead if you had a question.
Yeah, I did. It's an interesting point. Yeah, and I don't think I've heard that before. So you're protecting the business versus like my business as a service provider versus
Hmm.
my customers. does that take a cultural shift, or is it just more understanding, like, okay, here's how I need to, redeploy, reconfigure, or is it
Um, it
philosophy?
it can be a little bit of a philosophy, but the change in philosophy to wanting to protect the end customer typically will cause a change in, say, architecture or configuration, right? So, as an example, somebody who's just protecting their own network, they might have like an automated, what's called a remote trigger black hole.
Mhm,
That's essentially just shutting off the IP that's getting attacked, potentially even upstream, because ISPs have ISPs typically, right? Except for the tier ones, so they might shut that IP off upstream from their network. So that a lot of ISPs will have. So maybe they have some automatic detection, some automatic RTBH, and that's protecting their network. So when they want to go and protect their end customer, that will typically involve, getting a DDoS vendor, perhaps installing some appliances in the network, be it in line in front of their routers or to the side of their routers in more of a detect and redirect architecture. But that's typically what you're stepping into when you go from protecting the network to protecting the actual end customer. Is you're doing some hardware or some software um, that is designed for that purpose, right? And then, of
mhm.
course, when we're talking about selling as a service, you're typically also providing some type of software, web interface, reporting, or alerting to those customers, right? Because when they're signing up for a service, they expect to be able to see the value, right? They want to see, okay, did I get attacked? How much attack was mitigated? How many attacks are you guys blocking for me? I want to get an email or say maybe like a Slack notification when I get an attack. So those are all kind of things that typically will go along with DDoS protection as a service.
Gotcha. Just in making that shift too, so like you said,
Hmm.
okay, so it's like I know I'm protecting my business now. I've made the philosophical switch and so on, and I'm looking at that, how I'm currently configured. Do you ever find there are, I don't know, protection gaps, or even I don't know, I know there's not a standard for this, but is there, I don't know, a benchmark that someone
Hmm.
can look at, go, all right, I'm at point A, I want to get to point B to offer this service?
Yeah. So some gaps that there might be, you might have some unprotected links. So this could be like unprotected transit capacity, or some companies will choose to monitor their peering capacity. Most DDoSes do come in just on the transit side. We don't typically see a lot on the peering, but that might be one, like are they just looking at transit? Or are they also looking at peering? That's something you could consider. Um, I will say, like, kind of an industry standard minimum kind of DDoS capacity is going to be 20 to 30% of your edge bandwidth, right? So let's say somebody has um, 500 gigabit of internet capacity, right? They're an ISP. They have 5 sites, and at those 5 sites, they have 100 gigabit connections of transit to their upstream. Typically, to have a good DDoS protection, it's expected you would have a minimum of 20% of that in DDoS capability. So, out of 500 gigs of connected bandwidth, you would probably want to have at least 100 gigabit of DDoS scrubbing capacity. So that's kind of like a starting point, right?
Mhm.
There are many customers who, if it's cost effective enough, they'll just protect their whole edge. If I have 500 gigs of bandwidth, I have 500 gigs of scrubbing. Period. Right. So that's obviously the ultimate place you would like to be, because then no matter if you have multiple people getting attacks, even if those attacks are 300 gig total, you're fine. You can absorb that. So those are kind of the, I guess, differences that some people might kind of, or some ISPs might consider, in their gaps, right?
Okay. Now, does that come to, so okay, so I find these gaps, for instance. Now, is this a matter of, do I need to invest in more gear, more tech? What do I need to do in this sort
Hmm.
of case to get to the point where I can effectively offer this as a service?
Yeah. So some common things that service providers, hosters, whoever is thinking about offering DDoS protection as a service, some common steps they'll want to take is they might have 10 gigabit connections to their upstreams, right? And so maybe their normal traffic is fine. Let's say they have three 10 gigabit connections and they normally are running at about 9 gigabit. That's fine for their normal traffic, right? But what's nice is a lot of upstreams now are offering you, say, that same 10 gigabit of commit, but you run a 100 gigabit connection to them. And sometimes it's cheaper nowadays to get a 100 gigabit connection to your upstream than it is to ask for multiple 10 gigabits, right? But the important thing about that is if you can convert your 10 gigabits to 100 gigabits, even if you're paying for the same amount of committed capacity, you now have the ability to burst much higher, right? So typically they'll pay on 95th percentile. So maybe I don't expect over a month, I expect my traffic 95% of the time to be under 10 gigs. But if I have three 100 gigabit connections, I could burst all the way up to 300. So getting that extra capacity, that extra burst capability can allow you to absorb much larger DDoS attacks without needing to, do like a remote trigger black hole to
Mhm.
protect the network. So that's a big one. Router upgrades can be very common if you're looking to offer DDoS protection as a service. So you typically will want like a carrier grade router. So for example, if you're wanting to allow all the traffic to come into your router first and then send it over a scrubbing device, that router needs to be able to fully ingest any traffic it's getting, right? So there are some routers that are kind of more software routers where the processing is done on CPU instead of done in hardware, right?
Mm,
And
mhm.
so those, if you ingest a DDoS to those, a lot of times it will cause issue. So if you have a software-based router, you might have to do something like an inline architecture where you put an appliance in front of your router because you're having to protect the router itself as well. Whereas if have something like, all the big players like a Cisco or Juniper or Nokia, they're larger carrier grade models, those will be able to ingest whatever you can send it on those ports. If they've got 10, 100 gigabit ports, they can handle that. You know what I mean? So um, they're more capable of receiving all the traffic and then sending it wherever it needs to go. So router upgrades is pretty common if someone is thinking about offering DDoS as a service. And of course, if you're going from 10 gig to 100 gig, you might have to do a router upgrade to do that as well, right?
Right, right. Now, how much of that I'm just thinking, I always love any excuse to buy gear. Like, I don't care
Yeah.
what it is, right? Like a new amp, photography
Hmm.
gear, whatever it is that I'm into, right? But, in terms of getting there, I mean, you do you need the carrier grade router if you don't already have those routers at the edge, or what drives
Nope,
the
not
investment?
necessarily. So typically, like let's say if you don't have a carrier grade router, but you can do 100 gigabit connection to your upstreams, then you might choose a DDoS protection architecture like inline to protect those routers, right? So you can architect your DDoS solution, around that.
Yep,
It just depends. So what happens with a lot of customers as they get enough different sites, right? Let's say maybe they got 8 different locations, and maybe even in those locations they might have 4 or 5 links coming in. Instead of being in line and running all of those links through a DDoS protection appliance, it can be more cost efficient, say maybe just to have one appliance, maybe every other location, right? And then ingest the traffic into your network and then send it over the scrubbers. So inline typically makes more sense for um, less sites, right? Maybe a couple of sites and maybe one connection at each site. Um, maybe up to 5 is what I see. Typically, if we're talking inline architecture, it's usually 1 to 5 devices, like DDoS devices. And once you go past needing, say, maybe 4 or 5 DDoS devices, most customers would switch more to a detect and redirect architecture where you just have a couple of devices in your network placed strategically and you can send traffic to them. So whether or not you need carrier grade routers just really depends on what type of architecture you're willing and able to do.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, we certainly, you can certainly purchase an appliance and protect the router itself as well, for
Right,
sure.
right. Can you just do me a favor for point of clarification,
Yeah.
um, just on those architecture types? So you mentioned inline, which
Hmm.
sounds pretty self-explanatory,
Hmm.
and detect and redirect. But for people
Yeah.
who may not be familiar, and I'll just let
Yeah.
everybody know that Pete Cutler and I are going to go deeper into these architecture
Hmm.
options. We've got some webinars coming up in December. But while we're here, if you could just kind of categorize, we usually talk about inline, data path, or virtually inline, and then
Hmm.
how the detect and redirect and scrubbing. You could just give a synopsis of each of those so
Yeah.
everyone
A quick.
follows along?
Yeah. So in an inline architecture, that is where, this is typically done at your transit edge or where you're taking in your internet, right? That's typically where we like to do DDoS protection. So to keep it from coming into your network, kind of no matter the architecture. But when we're in line, let's say, or any DDoS vendor is in line, that's going to have an appliance in front of your edge router on making the connection to your transit, right? So if you have a 100 gigabit internet connection, that connection would come to a DDoS appliance first, and then it would go from that appliance to the customer's router, right?
Mhm,
And so before the traffic even hits the actual customer's network equipment, it's going through DDoS scrubbing. When it's in line, it's you're seeing all of the traffic, right? You're not doing any type of sampling. It's very fast, right? So you're doing detection and mitigation all right there on the appliance, all in real time, and it's always on, looking at all of the traffic. It's kind of like the Cadillac, right, of DDoS protection. It's the premium, right? So inline it's also very easy because you don't have to
mhm,
make changes to your routers, right? So that's kind of a benefit of it. So that's kind of some of the pluses. So a consideration though with inline could be scalability. So if you're doing inline, that means every connection that you have, every transit connection you have needs to go through a device, right? So if you need to add 2 more connections, that could be 2 more devices, right? 3 more connections, 3 more devices, right? So that's the consideration with inline.
mhm,
Um, virtually inline, it's not that different from physically inline. It's just basically where you do inline, but you're not in front of the router.
mhm,
That's it's kind of a niche case where you'd want to do that. Typically, if you have 100 gigabit ports on your router, all right, so you could do a 100 gig connection to a DDoS scrubber, but you have 10 gig connections coming in from your upstreams. Let's say you have 7 10 gig connections, right? It might, if you're trying to do physically in line, it might take multiple devices coming into that router. But with virtually inline, you can ingest all of that traffic to your router and then just send all of it over the connection to your scrubber all the time, right? And so we call that virtually inline. We're not physically in line, but all of the traffic is going through DDoS scrubbing all of the time. And it really is that when you're kind of in between 10 gigabit and 100 gigabit upstream connection, that really is the sweet spot to use that.
okay,
Um, then we do have, I mean, us. I say we because I work at Corero, but I mean, it's any vendor, right? Like these are all just kind of theoretical architectures. So there can be edge protection.
mhm,
So this is where you do DDoS detection. You're getting information from the router and you're sending it to some type of detection. It could be a device, could be a virtual machine, but you're sending that information from the router to a detection engine. And then if DDoS is seen on that engine, then a block can be put into the router itself, right? So like this could be a flow spec block on the router. Um, we happen to have a good kind of product with Juniper where we can put firewall filters onto the edge, onto those Juniper routers. But essentially, edge means using your routers as the muscle
Mhm.
to block DDoS. You're going to need some type of brains to direct that muscle. So usually you're going to need some type of detection that's fed off the routers, but you can use the routers themselves to block. Then finally, we talked about detect and redirect. That is where we're talking about, again, doing sampling off the router, doing that detection. But when a DDoS is seen, then a message is sent into the router to say, hey, this one IP that's under attack, I want to send it over DDoS scrubbing, right? And just that one. So in a detect and redirect, not all of the traffic is flowing over an appliance all of the time, right?
Right.
You're waiting to see, okay, did this IP get attacked, and then redirect it to an appliance. So that's kind of
Okay.
a quick overview of those. You know, I don't want to take too much thunder away from Pete. So
No worries, no worries. I thought it was appropriate because we're using some of
yeah,
that terminology.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you. So, all right. So, kind of going back to this on the prep side.
Hmm.
So, let's just say, all right, I've got everything's deployed
Hmm.
as it should be.
Hmm.
What do I need to have in place
Hmm.
to even support the service? Yeah, probably
Right.
want to think about this before we change the
Well, yeah, before
deployment,
you deploy, but
but
yeah,
yeah,
I got you.
yeah.
So obviously, you're going to need to have some type of productization done,
Mhm.
right? So deciding how you're going to offer this to your customers. Is this going to be something I offer to everyone and we just charge a little bit to everyone's bill? Is this something I'm going to give to everyone for free? Which I guess is not the true productization of it. But deciding, am I going to do a unsubscribe subscribe model where all I do is I have people, it's either on or off? Am I going to do different levels to it? So you need to have thought out that productization with your
Mhm.
product management and decide how you're going to offer it. Like our DDoS solution, and I'm sure many solutions in general are flexible to how you want to choose that. You could make two or three different products to offer your customers, right?
Mhm.
You'll need a way to onboard customers, right? So you got to think about the process. Let's say you have a customer who is getting, you know, internet bandwidth from you, and then they call you up and say, "I want DDoS protection," right? So you got to think about, what is that process going to be? What
Mm.
is, your paperwork going to look like, on your system? um, what is the process going to be for going into the DDoS solution and changing that customer from a non-subscriber to a subscriber, right?
Yeah.
And then if you're going to be doing a lot of that, or let's say you have some good programmers, you might want to automate that. That's definitely
Right.
doable, especially if the DDoS solution has an API. You can do that in your software and then make a call to the DDoS solution to make the necessary changes and just to kind of automate all of that. Um, I guess also you got to think about support, right? How you're going to handle that.
Yeah, exactly. Any recommendations there, when somebody actually calls for customer support?
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely, you want to have some network engineers, right? Like, you don't want to just have support people who can only answer the phone and then just kind of take, the message, so to speak. You need some people who can do some analysis on the product. Now, there are many products, and including ours. They're easy to use, um, and maybe they don't require a lot of day-to-day interaction. Right? They're kind of like ours is kind of set it and forget it, but you do want to think about those occasions because people will call up and have questions. You can stand up a SOC yourself if you're large and you expect to have a lot of customers. You might have some. You might stand up a dedicated SOC, right? You could also offload that to a managed service. Like maybe your DDoS vendor offers a managed service where they could handle that for you. So if you get difficult questions from your customer, you can just kind of pass those off and ask your DDoS
Mm.
vendor. So but thinking about the customer service and the customer life cycle, right, is something to think about as well when you're offering a service,
Sure.
because they will expect a premium service when they start paying for it. they don't expect, just to have like, oh, we made it a little bit better. Like, no, they when they're paying, they expect perfection.
Yeah.
That's how most customers are.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna do this. I did this before because it's our webinar, so I can do this.
Mhm.
The only thing I'm gonna say is when I got here and I learned, because I do have an IT background,
Mhm.
that when you call us for support, you actually get a hold of the engineer that's gonna take it through the whole way. So we don't do that whole escalation path, go by the
Right.
script, and so on. So I'm gonna give us a shameless plug because it's our
Yeah, I
webinar.
like that about us as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but I have flashbacks at times when, it's 2 in the morning and I'm in the data center and I'm trying to get something fixed and I'm gonna go through
Mhm.
all of those,
Yep.
"Did you check the power? Did you" like, "Oh, come on, man, just
Mhm.
help me out here."
Yep.
Okay, I vented. I got the shameless plug in there. Alright, so, I guess the last thing I'll hit 'cause we're
Yeah.
getting pretty close on time. So, let's assume, alright, I've stood up my service, it's going along, it's great. Now it's time to expand. Now
Mhm.
I can see growth in this. What do I need to think about in expanding an offering? And I guess as I'm asking the question, it could be taken a couple different ways, right?
Mhm.
We are talking more of the technical at this point, but I'd be interested in your thoughts from a product management perspective as well. But in terms of, do I just throw more gear out there, or how have you seen it when customers have grown their offer?
Yeah. So it really depends on if you're growing it a little bit at a time, right? Kind of like a linear, we're just adding new customers as we go along. Then typically it is just to add a little more gear, right?
Mhm.
If you
Okay.
you know, need a few extra locations, something like that. But there's also the situation where maybe you're growing like by acquisition, right? Like all of a sudden you're going to go from 10,000 customers to of for say a service provider. Not necessarily all of those would be DDoS, right? But say you're going from 10,000 to 30 or 40,000, right? In that case, you would need to plan not just a equipment upgrade, right, and getting more capacity, more links, that type of thing. But you may need to plan a better onboarding process. You may need to hire some more support engineers,
Mm.
or offload that. But hopefully, what we try to do with our customers is you plan for that growth path when you first install a solution, right? You kind of account for it so that it is easy. Like when we work with our customers, we talk about what growth would look like, and most are interested to know, if I doubled in my size, what would that look like, right?
Right.
And typically, those plans will be in place. But honestly, for just adding more customers, just kind of in a linear scale, it typically is just add the customers. And if you get to a point where you need, say, another device and another, link coming into the network, it's just kind of add that one link and that one device. And typically, it's not going to be a too big of a burden. That's always kind of the line, right? Like in your support, as you add more customers and the support is getting a little more and more worked, right? Where's that line where you need to upgrade? And that really is just kind of on a per company basis. There's not like at least not that I know of, a single line. Oh, for every 50 DDoS customers you have, you should have X number of support,
Mm. Right.
personnel. It really depends on the customer, how often, what type of customer they are, how often they call in. I will say, um, gaming providers tend to be some of the most demanding. They get a lot of attacks and they need a lot of assistance. Service providers themselves tend to be the least demanding, and then hosting is kind of in the middle. So it kind of depends on what your customers are as to how much support you're going to need for that base.
Oh, got it. Okay, that makes sense. So look, we're at the bottom. I
Yeah,
did get a couple questions. So do you have a couple minutes
yeah,
just
absolutely.
just to go through? Okay, all right, cool. So all right, here's one. So when evaluating current DDoS defenses, what are the most important technical capabilities providers should prioritize
Yeah.
upgrade? Or I guess I guess when you're current DDoS defenses. Yeah, what should they prioritize in terms of upgrading or improving?
Yeah. So, it, as far as evaluating DDoS, solutions,
Hmm.
for me, the things you need to think about are your speed to mitigation, right? So, how quickly, when an attack happens, how quickly is it mitigated? um, that can differ vendor to vendor and also can differ just architecture to architecture. So how quickly can you get some mitigation in? Because like the inline, that might be less than a second, right? If you're doing a detect and redirect, would say maybe using something like a net flow off the router, that could take over a minute or a couple of minutes. So it really just depends. So, for me, the sweet spot is 10 seconds or less.
Hmm.
I believe if you can kind of get that DDoS mitigated within 10 seconds, there's typically no ongoing issues like a web server knocked over, that
Yeah.
type of thing. The other thing is how much protection are you getting per dollar, right? So, how much scrubbing am I getting kind of per dollar, right? So, I would try to maximize the amount of scrubbing DDoS blocking capacity you're getting for your dollar. That's really important, and really just a company and a product that's going to be easy to use and easy to maintain. That ongoing, interaction with a product can really be a hidden cost. If you're constantly having to touch it every day and you have to dedicate, say, maybe one or two people to always tinkering with the solution, that's a big cost that may not be on the quote, right? But it's going to cost you a lot of money. Whereas if you get something very automatic and something that's not going to cause a lot of false positives, that's going to be, much lower to cost to maintain over time.
Got it.
Yep.
Great. So let me, okay, I've got a non-technical question here.
Okay.
What do you see as the most lucrative expansion opportunities in the DDoS protection as a service market?
Yeah. Okay. So I would say the most lucrative is definitely going to be businesses, kind of like larger enterprises, where they're on that cusp of, let's say they have 10 or 20 gigabit of internet service coming into them. So this is going to be, banks, schools, hospitals, could be legal offices, could be government entities, and they have, say a decent amount of internet connection they're purchasing from you, right? But it's not worth them having their own protection environment. But they need to protect like 20 or 30 gig of traffic themselves. We have some customers who have a lot of those types of customers, and they're the ones who do really well. One of our customers, um, I want to say they were in the profit after about 6 months
Hmm.
after
Wow.
purchasing a solution,
Wow.
and they had a customer base, but they also expanded it, and they have large customers, who are willing to pay, let's say they're paying a few thousand for internet, they might pay 1,000 or more a month for DDoS protection, right? And
Gotcha.
if you have a few of those, that can really make a dent in your
Mhm.
ROI timeframe.
I
Yeah.
Is that normal? That profitability timeline? Is it?
No, that was probably
Yeah.
exceptional.
Okay.
That was, I would typically expect more 2 to 4 years, maybe time frame.
Yeah.
Um, is a little more normal.
Okay.
But yeah, no, those guys just happen to have like all the best customers, like we're talking about, large capacity needs, but they don't want to do DDoS protection themselves, or it doesn't make sense for them to purchase like an appliance
Yeah.
themselves. They need it done upstream and they're willing to pay a decent amount for it. They had a lot of those.
Wow.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And last question.
hmm
What strategic or business process changes have you seen as vital for providers launching a DDoS protection service?
So I would say, integrating the DDoS onboarding with their normal like customer onboarding. That really is kind of the biggest thing that helps our customers. And so it can be manual or it can be automatic, right? It could just be processes like really working through, okay, when someone signs up for DDoS, we need to do X, Y, and Z for them to get them onboarded, have a good process laid out. Everybody knows it. But the ones that do really well, they actually, do a little bit of programming and automate that, integrate with their, kind of customer software, customer management software. And so when someone signs up for DDoS, it just automatically provisions them in the system, and they don't have to do anything. It's just done automatically. That's probably the process that I've seen that has really helped uh, our customers kind of streamline, doing DDoS protection as a service.
Okay, great. Well, look, thanks for taking the extra time. Thanks for your
Yeah,
time, and everybody, thanks for having joined us. So we're gonna wrap it there, and then yeah, thanks, man.
awesome. Yeah,
All right,
I appreciate it. It was fun.
yeah, take care, man. Take care,
All right,
everybody. Bye bye.
bye.